things we used to talk about back then. And we have talked about over the years, again and again and again. Remember when we used to talk about inventory quality? When were we going to unlock all that premium inventory? We were waiting for years and talking about it. And I don't know how many panels I programmed on that and asking the question, what is premium? When will the big brand dollars get here? And then, of course, we spent years with panels talking about ad fraud, about transparency, about privacy. And, of course, that perennial question we still ask, when will creative finally catch up to the data and the targeting? This time, however, I really wanted to focus in this annual Tahoe show on execution, on what people are actually doing on the ground, what they're learning from the everyday process of media buying and planning through these channels, and the ways in which they're building their stacks. So one of my mandates for this event is asking all of our speakers to focus on those, get us into the weeds, talk about the ways in which they're doing this, and what they're learning from the actual process of media buying and planning. So for instance, we're going to have over the next few days a lot of examples of this. We're going to start today with T-Mobile. They'll be talking about how they're building their new tech, they're building a tech stack focused on the idea of optimizing customer experience and what that means. We're going to hear today from 3 Day Blinds, just talking about how to clean all that damn data. We're going to hear from both Textile and Essence and the Essence Agency, just talking about, and this is something that actually came out of our last event, just talking about how different companies go about doing media buying and what they can learn from each other about simply that basic process. We're going to have ASICS here talking on Saturday morning, talking about getting beyond this notion, this broad category of viewability, that metric of viewability, and really aiming towards the goal, which is attention. And we'll have cases, loads of cases. We're going to have Norton and LifeLock talking about the lessons that were learned from a new product launch. We're going to have Haven Life, who's going to talk about the ways in which they're using decades of legacy insurance data and combining it with online and digital data and D2C brand building. And of course, we'll also be talking about how media buyers are using this new influx of retail inventory of marketplaces from places like Amazon and others. We're going to be talking about the ways in which video fragmentation is being planned against, and of course, how people are building their first-party data chests. And as I say relentlessly, our events are structured around peer-to-peer sharing. The whole idea, the whole structure of this is people sharing their best practices. And that's what this is about. And that's why I always like to start with a survey. And as many of you, especially those of you among our VIPs know, I sent a survey out several days ago to try to start with your voices, to talk about what you guys are thinking, how you're responding to some key questions in the industry, to seed these conversations. And I'm sure that the roundtables are going to be pretty lively. I got a torrent of responses. I opened up the floodgates. I have literally 21 slides. Don't get scared. I'm not going to walk through all of them for you. We're going to put them online. But I quoted a lot of these. I've underscored some of the things that really popped for me. But for instance, one of my key questions is, where have you seen the most dramatic shifts in media allocation in the last year? And of course, a lot of opinions about moving to OTT and moving into video. I was especially struck by this one respondent who said we've moved the majority of our linear TV budget over to Amazon OTT over the past year. That's amazing. We're going to be talking about this, by the way, on Saturday. We're going to have a panel focused especially on video fragmentation. And of course, CTV and linear. An interesting insight that I pulled out of this is the ways in which the upfront was very tight and very costly and very difficult this year, and opens up the question of whether we're going to see more dollars moving into programmatic and OTT as a result. I'm sorry, I'm moving through this quickly. I wanted to highlight some of the ideas and the concepts and just your voices and get that out there at the beginning, because that's what this event really is about. We'll be posting this deck online so you can go back and download it later. We continue to allocate more and more funds to programmatic and social. It's interesting that the divide here, programmatic drives efficient targeted reach, and social has driven strong conversion rates. I've seen a range of opinions about social and its ability to convert, so it's interesting to hear somewhat different approaches and ideas about social. Here in particular, for instance, Facebook has created this mysterious game that everyone thinks they can win if they just try hard enough. As sort of repeated failures on Facebook, and a lot of people complaining about the conversion rates on Facebook, in addition to the increasing costs and having to deal with that inventory. I hope that will come up a lot over the next few days. I'm curious about podcasts. How many of you are advertising in podcasts already? How many of you are using dynamic insertion and using programmatic driving it? Interesting. I'd love to hear, I personally would love to hear more about how that's worked. I've always wanted to program more around that here. It's been hard to get people to talk about their experiences since it's so early in the game. I also asked, what's been the most successful channel or source for building your trove of first-party data? We're going to be talking about that today, and I'm sure we'll be talking about it throughout the next few days. But it's interesting. There are a lot of traditional channels here that we've seen. You know, sites, lookalike modeling, search driving a lot of this, web and app experiences. Lead gen, using Google Analytics to track people and retarget. And then I asked, what's been the biggest challenge in gathering reliable data from partners and third-party providers? And this is all over the map, but there are some very key themes that emerge here. In addition to transparency, what's reliable and verifiable? Keeping track of the fees, again, transparency. But the biggest theme, I think, of course, is the multiple sources that are necessary. Where am I here? Oops. Multiple sources of data, and this point I think was especially interesting. No one source is outperforming the others, but it's a combination of modeling that works. In other words, the data field is going to be at least as complicated as the programmatic field has been in piecing these things together. Another point that I really that popped for me, because I've been hearing this from a number of marketers and media buyers recently, is the problem of recency. Actually, Beeswax raised that a little bit in their presentation. The importance of recency, and that's one of the things that's harder to track among data providers. This is actually one of my favorites. Accuracy, confirming the data is true. Timeliness, confirming the data is fresh. And nulls, confirming the data exists at scale where you can do our modeling, which I think means that everything about data is challenging. Different partners not playing well together. Probably compatibility is one of the things that popped among all of the answers, that that's the most common problem. Notice about reach reports, different partners not playing well together. Especially Facebook is called out increasingly as one of the real sources of that incompatibility. What's been the biggest challenge to investing in advanced TV, OTT, connected TV, addressable? Across the board, measurability, being able to scale and plan this accurately is really the biggest problem here. And of course, the incompatibility across the screens. We'll be talking about that Saturday. But it's interesting, I think a couple of comments here that really pop for me is the ways in which clients are responding to this environment, that they're still not identifying it as a true programmatic environment in the sense that you're buying audiences instead of shows, but that you're still talking to clients in sort of that older school of needing to them wanting to know what shows they're up against and having the measurement tools to actually show them, and that's not available in this environment yet. Okay. And again, convincing clients that the investment is worth it, and the premium CPMs and what you're getting in return, and especially having the metrics and the proof. And again, more of the same, measuring impact. And then I opened up Pandora's box. I asked the question, what's the one thing you would like all ad tech, MarTech vendors to know before they meet with you? And I just got reams of responses to this. But here are some really interesting things that come up. There's especially the emphasis on testing. The need for better testing, the need to be able to launch tests at this at smaller scale, and then to be able to verify the results was something that really popped. The other thing, of course, is differentiation, that a lot of the technology has become commoditized, and it's important for vendors to really lead with the differentiation and to prove it. again, short term, and being able to verify the claims, being able to have independent data on hand so that they can actually verify the claims in some of these tests. But also being able to align technology, and we're actually going to be talking about this. I think we're going to be segueing this into T-Mobile's presentation. The ways in which the technology aligns with the specific business goals of the company in a couple of ways. Evan is going to be talking about this in terms of how it relates to T-Mobile's emphasis on experience, but then also the ways in which a lot of the technologies are too universal and really not necessarily aligned with a specific business segment, and that there aren't enough test cases around a particular business segment to be convincing. I think those are really interesting ideas about the ways in which where the technology needs to head to satisfy the needs of marketers. And then finally I asked, what's the most overhyped trend in digital advertising? And again, we got quite a range, but it's interesting the things that are sort of registering in people's minds and what they're thinking about or what's being pitched to them. Voice, I think universally I keep hearing voice is still overhyped. It's still not proving itself as a consumer model. The habits aren't there yet to justify it. Blockchain, it's interesting that somebody's getting pitched ideas about TikTok all the time. This is the first that I've actually heard of TikTok. Anybody else, is anybody advertising on TikTok yet? You are? Where? What are you doing? Yeah. On TikTok, I'd love to hear about that. I hope we can hear about that over the next few days. Influencer marketing and audio, Facebook, and then talk of emerging channels. I wanted to highlight sort of this last quote because I thought it was really apropos of where programmatic has come over the last 10, 12 years. Is that, if you'll recall, originally programmatic was pitched to us as something that was going to simplify things. The automation was going to make things easier, and as we know, exactly the opposite has happened. But I think this is a really interesting point. What it has done is make us start asking smarter questions about who our advertising is reaching and what the real impact is. In other words, it's really raised the bar for accountability across the board. And that's an interesting byproduct of programmatic, and I think something that we'll be talking about and we'll be seeing across the board over the next few days. I wanted to, just a few, for those of you who are new to the summit, I do want to outline a few basic summit rules so you understand how this format works. First of all, everything that we do on stage at the Media Post Summits is on the record. We're live streaming it, we're reporting on it, we're blogging it, we'll have after action reports and video clips, we'll be posting the videos afterwards. If you have people back at the home office who you want to have tune in, go have them come to MediaPost.com and they can find the links here. But then everything, when we come on, you are first timers at Tahoe. This before? First rule, drink. Drink and drink again. Second rule, don't screw around with rule number 1. That little vague headache that you're feeling, that's altitude and dehydration happening at once. They have a humidity here of like 7, 8, 9%. I'm a northern Jersey boy. I was raised in the shadow of the Meadowlands. When I first came here, I thought it was the end of days when I saw humidity at 8%. I didn't know that was legally allowable. But believe me, you want to keep hydrated. It's really important, especially if you're working out or hiking around here. Also, coolest damn place on the planet. This is where Frank and the Rat Pack had their casino, for God's sakes. This is where Michael Corleone had his headquarters. You find the right tour guide, they'll tell you where the bodies are buried. And yeah, Fredo is out in the middle of that lake somewhere. You don't get damn cooler than that. So welcome to Tahoe. I hope you have a good time. It's one of our favorite venues. So anyway, welcome to everyone. Thanks in advance to all of our speakers. They put a lot of time into this. I've spoken to all of them over the last few weeks. I'm really looking forward to all of this. And especially where we're going to start off, because we're going to go right into the weeds. We're going to go right into ad tech. And Evan Barocas, who is a returning champion here, many times has been here in several companies that he's been to over the last few years. He's the director of media operations at T-Mobile. He's going to talk about the ways in which T-Mobile is rethinking how they buy and plan and think about and build their next generation ad stack with an eye towards optimizing the customer experience. This is an interesting idea. He's going to walk us through some of the basics here. Then his colleague, Kelly Keir, is going to come up, and she and I will drill a little more deeply into this. Please welcome back Evan Barocas. Where'd you go?
Thank you, Steve. I'm really excited to be back, and thank you for hosting this event again. I've loved coming here over the years, and then each year there seems to be a major theme that ends up happening. This year, apparently, the theme is the word or the number 2.0, because now I'm doing that. So, Joe, thank you for teeing up Programmatic 2.0, and I get to dive into AdTech 2.0. When I found out that he was doing 2.0, I originally wanted to change mine to, hold on one sec. I really wanted to change mine to AdTech 3.0, but I don't think we're there yet. So I'm really excited to dive into AdTech 2.0, or T-Mobile's AdTech 2.0. So I'm Director of Media Operations at T-Mobile, and what I support is really how we buy media across all screens and mediums, both offline and digital. How we measure the ad tech we use to deliver a good customer experience or deliver on our business objectives. I joined T-Mobile around 11 months ago when we were at the midst of a transformation in how we were buying media. We had a couple of challenges in terms of how we use data, in terms of the ad tech that we owned, and our solution to that was to take greater ownership over our advertising technology and the partnerships that enabled all of this. So we brought all of that in-house. We built out an ad tech and platforms team that is supporting all of the contracts and platforms themselves, and then we license those or permission those for our agencies to activate on our behalf. So what I'm really excited about is to take you through our journey. To date, it's by no means over. It's very much in flight and very much in progress. And then Kelly and Steve will dive a little bit deeper in terms of how we've actually brought this to life and how this has changed a little bit our thought process and processes at T-Mobile. I didn't want to use a Lumascape, so I put 4 up there because I couldn't find another picture that displayed complexity well enough. So instead of putting 1 Lumascape up there, I decided to throw 4 up there. I don't need to tell all of you that ad tech is complex. You heard it from Joe, you heard it from Steve. I'm pretty sure that every single person that comes up here is going to talk about how complex this ecosystem is. Delivering a consistent and high-quality consumer experience in the midst of this complexity is an incredible challenge for us. Because it's not just about delivering a quality display experience or quality mobile experience or quality video experience. We have one consumer sitting behind all of this, and they need a consistent experience across all of it. That is an enormous amount of fragmentation to deal with. That's an enormous amount of dealing with vertically integrated supply chains and walled gardens and gaps in data, gaps in measurability to try and piece together what should be a holistic view of the consumer across all of this. It makes delivering that experience incredibly challenging. And by and large, I think we've struggled to do that. I think that this is just an eMarketer survey conducted of both marketers and consumers of, are we able to deliver an excellent customer experience? I think this is just one feedback loop. I think we could look at the changing state of our ecosystem and see a lot of different pieces of feedback from consumers around the quality of the experience that they've been getting by and large. It's not great. And there's a lot of reasons it's not great. And when we saw kind of the state of our advertising technology ecosystem, we saw massive opportunity to improve this. But it forced us to stop looking at the problems within the ecosystem, the problems like transparency or the problems like viewability or fraud or auction dynamics as the problem that we needed to solve for. The problem we really needed to solve for was the impact that those things have on the consumer experience. The problem we needed to solve for was improving fundamentally the consumer experience and putting that central to our decision making. So when we looked at poor data quality and we looked at the amount of non-safe inventory we were buying or fraud, or if did we have an actual transparent supply chain, and did we understand our auction dynamics well enough to avoid first price auctions when we were really just targeting second price auctions? These were all leading indicators. These were not the problems that we needed to solve for. These are leading indicators of what is the quality of the experience that we have in market. So if these things are high, we could probably extrapolate that no matter what our performance metrics are saying, the actual quality of the experience by and large in market is going to be poor. So we took a different approach at T-Mobile. We took on greater, as I said before, we took on greater ownership of our advertising technology. And to build a new stack, we needed to ground our decision-making in something that was not only central to our business objectives, but that was truly important for us as a brand. And that was starting with the actual experience that we were delivering. So we did this in a couple of ways, but what we started with was 2 questions that we asked all of our internal partners at T-Mobile. So we went to our creative teams, our legal teams, our strategy and planning teams, our lines of business, everybody that contributed start to finish, not just within ad tech, but beyond ad tech, everyone that contributed to the experience that we were delivering via programmatic and via our ad tech stack. And we asked them 2 questions. The first question was, how should someone feel when they experience our advertising? Not, how many times should they see an impression, not what data should we be using, but how at the end of the day, when they see a TV ad or they see a video ad on their mobile device or they see a banner, how should we want them to feel? Do we want them to feel inspired? Do we want them to feel curious? Do we want them to feel engaged? Do we want them to feel happy? We definitely didn't want them to feel harassed. We definitely didn't want them to feel violated in how we were using their data. We certainly didn't want them to feel vulnerable in terms of the data that they were sharing with us. So it gave us a lot of clarity in terms of what we were actually trying to achieve with our advertising. The second question we asked is, and what does our advertising need to be to create that experience? If we're trying to make someone feel curious, what do we need to be doing to actually spark that curiosity via our advertising? And this grounded, when we actually talked about the needs, what we needed to do, that actually started grounding a lot of our decision making. Instead of it being, we're looking for an ad tech platform that can, achieve the lowest CPM or unlock this inventory source for us or be a point solution for this, it actually started becoming around a greater need of relevancy or a greater need of impactfulness, which was reflected in our RFI and our RFP processes. So again, we organized around that need. That need then became the central focus of what was our ad tech evaluation process, which is still very much in progress. So as an example, let's say we need to be relevant, and that becomes the organizing need that we're using. And this is an example. We have 3 core needs that we extrapolated from that exercise. Relevancy is one of them, but I'm using it as an example here. Well, for us to be relevant, we need the right data, we need the right creative, we need the right buying platforms, we need transparent supply chains, we need the right publishers, we also need the right measurement platforms and business intelligence platforms, so we actually know if we're doing this effectively or not. But the organizing principle around this and the way in which we organize relevancy is the question we're asking of each one of these solutions is not how well they do that function, is does this function or does this platform help us do relevancy better? That's the question at the end of the day at the top of our RFI and RFP processes. That's what we look at when we're actually evaluating them. And that's actually been a huge element of our decision-making process when we've been evaluating ad tech platforms. In addition to organizing around a central need, we applied 3 principles to help us evaluate the efficacy of each platform against that need as well. The first principle that we applied is around simplicity and transparency. I think that these are going to be themes, and again, Steve just talked about it, that your ad tech partners should help you simplify what is a very complex ecosystem. They should help you give clarity. They should help you build line of sight between you and the consumer. They shouldn't be adding to the complexity. If you don't know how your ad tech partners are using data, how their algorithms work and behave, then you aren't really in the control that I think we would all want to be over that consumer experience. Especially that's how we felt. That if we didn't really understand how these things worked, how they treated our data, we couldn't really control the experience at the end of the day. And transparency really dovetails into that simplicity. If we didn't know how all of our ad tech partners were using our dollars, we also weren't in control of that experience. If we didn't know explicitly and directly, not inferred, not extrapolated, but directly how they were making money and how they were using our dollars, we also were not in control of the consumer experience anymore. The second principle that we've applied to all ad tech evaluations is around the idea of relationships, and that relationships are essential. I think the next phase of ad tech is going to be built by relationships, not by solutions. I think that brands have to have relationships throughout the supply chain. And I think that the efficacy of all of our ad tech partnerships are not just how good of a solution they are for that function, but how well they foster collaboration across different ad tech solutions and across our partners, both internally and externally. So how well are these ad tech partners sharing data with each other? How well are they fostering collaboration between our agency teams and our internal creative teams and our strategy and planning teams? How well are they passing data between each other is now a critical point of evaluation of which we look at and evaluate at our advertising technology partners. Because again, like, if we don't have the right relationships in place, we're not in control of the experience at the end of the day. The last tenet or principle that we look at ad tech through is a concept that we call consumer-conscious, data-informed decision-making. Data is incomplete, measurement is incomplete, especially for brands with diversified media portfolios, especially if they span offline and online. The ability to actually, in a deterministic way, tie all of these data points together in a real-time and measurable way is very, very challenging, and data will always be incomplete. If data is always incomplete, then making a data-driven decision is going to be an incomplete decision. Data has to inform your decision-making, not drive your decision-making, and we very much embrace that at T-Mobile, where we always knew that that was going to be a gap for us, and therefore we had to let data inform our judgment in decision-making. And our judgment at the center of our decision-making became central to how we were evaluating ad tech and how we were assessing efficacy or performance. When we say consumer conscious, it's really about infusing our judgment with a sense of empathy for the consumer. What are they experiencing and how are they experiencing it? And at the end of the day, is this an actually good experience regardless of what the data is telling me? I think we've all probably been in meetings where someone has shown you a really, really, really shitty ad, and you've looked at that shitty ad, you'd be like, that's an awful ad, I don't want to use that ad, but somebody will tell you, oh my God, the performance on this is amazing. That's the moment where you're like, okay, we really have to challenge what we mean by performance and what's performing well and apply our judgment. No matter what this data is telling me, I know this is a bad experience, and we shouldn't be doing this. If we let data drive it, then all of a sudden we start investing in things that we know we shouldn't be, or investing in things because performance is justifying it, though it's incomplete. So beyond these three principles, and then again, organizing around the experience, we did the opposite of the first slide, where we looked at the leading indicators of what a bad experience is. We're now using the amount of control, both with data and creative, the amount of transparency we have, the amount of quality supply side and publisher relationships, the quality of our buying mechanics and how well we're actually able to not only have a clean supply chain, but determine our auction types and determine the actual type of inventory that we're buying as leading indicators of the quality of the experience that we have in market. So we're, again, like using these things not necessarily as problems or solutions, but as indicators of the experience. So I'm really excited to bring up Kelly and Steve, and they're going to talk a little bit more about how we've actually brought this to life. Thank you.
Thanks, Evan.
Yeah.
So let's start with an example. So you're evaluating tech and partners according to this higher value of experience. Give us a good example of how that informed specific decision making and how you actually made a decision to and not to go to a particular vendor.
Yeah, that's a great question. And one of the things that we have really embraced at T-Mobile is, while we're creating new teams and new ways of working, we are finding a lot of new opportunities of how we can bring different cross-functional teams to the table so that we are more holistically evaluating for different buying platforms, as Evan was mentioning. So an example that I'll give is we have been going through an evaluation of a buying platform, and we have partnered very closely with our internal analytics teams to ensure that we are sourcing data passback requirements that are going to enable future deep business analytics, measurement, and attribution. We've also partnered with our legal teams on requirements around privacy, which again is dovetailing into understanding the simplicity and the transparency of that particular platform. We partnered with the media strategy teams to understand what are their go-to-market strategies so that we can come back to the table with really good buying mechanics that include things like audience management and access to inventory that's going to drive that relevancy for that message. And we also, again, partnered very, very deeply with our activation teams on the agency side, where we needed to be sure that we were evaluating those overall capabilities around forecasting and planning. We've been very excited to embrace at T-Mobile because we're coming together as a cross-functional marketing team, not being the silos anymore. We are one unified marketing group. And we're able to align better on what are those business challenges so that we can deliver better solutions.
Well, then that begs the question, what does this look like internally? How do you organize actual people and tasks and communication across what had been silos so that this works?
Yeah, great question. And I will say, and leading this into, one of the things that I have learned to embrace and what I will say as a piece of advice to anybody that's going through this type of transformation is really committing yourself to the journey. So really what we have looked at is not only just building internal capabilities like what Evan was mentioning around bringing ad tech expertise in-house, but we really want to lean in with each of our internal and external stakeholders, like I was mentioning about the platform evaluation process. An example of it, we also recently ran a proof platform evaluation, and we brought in the creative leadership team as well as our agency development partners and brought them along for the journey from the very beginning in crafting what is the overall business case and identifying those opportunities for expanding on creative production opportunities as well as deeper and additional creative development and alongside the business case of what is the total cost savings that we can drive for the business and that efficiency. And because we were able to do that and align ourselves up on the ways of working together, we were deeply aligned on what the overall objective and outcome was that we were trying to accomplish and overall the evaluation criteria in which we were looking at each of these different solutions. And we were able to streamline that overall evaluation and selection process. And really shocking for us as a large enterprise as T-Mobile, we were able to land on a decision cross-functionally with all of these teams within a span of 4 weeks.
So since you mentioned bringing in creative, that's an interesting piece to me, is because ultimately the technology has to serve the message and has to serve, since experience is the thing that you're putting front and center. Tell us about, and that curiosity is one of the key themes you're going after, but tell us about that creative vision. And is creative helping to inform the technology? Is the technology informing creative as to what's possible? How does this change the equation of the tech versus creative?
Yeah, for us, and truly this has really been still a process for us and something that's very much in flight. So I don't have a really concrete example to share, but what I will say is that we have now started to more deeply engage with that team of understanding what are their core challenges from a creative perspective, whether that's with creative insights, any of the data and analytics around audiences that we're reaching, or creative production and just the ability to create digital assets in a streamlined manner. And because we've been able to connect with them and understand what are all the challenges that they are feeling, we've been able to partner with them in helping to manage that process of identifying what are some solutions that can help bring all of those components together. So like for a creative platform, we really are looking at tying the data, creative, and media all together in a holistic view. Again, we're still very much in progress with rolling this out.
Evan mentioned, and this sort of drafts a little bit off of the creative question, Evan mentioned that it's about relationships. And part of that, one of those key relationships is with the publishers, right? So tell me a little bit about how that's changing. Does this mean that you are seeking more direct relationships with those end publishers, those major media companies, less reliant on these technical intermediaries and DSPs, and having a more direct relationship with the publishers? And what do you want back from them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as Evan was mentioning, we really want to be building those deep relationships with the supply side, the SSPs, as well as the publishers directly. What we are doing differently is we are really leaning into our buying platform and DSP relationships and pushing them to become supply relationship facilitators, and how they're able to bring us closer to that supply side conversation. And so we're leaning in and being sure that we're understanding what are the publishers hearing, like how can we better create a transparent supply path, and leveraging the relationships that we're building with the buying platforms to help make that a reality. And really what we want is to bring all of those partners to come to the table together with us so that we are collectively building towards that better consumer experience.
Do you want to reduce the number of relationships or increase them? I mean, that's right. This is the
It is a great
problem.
question.
This is the problem, right?
I would say it's not even right now about more or less. What we have been really focused on is addressing what are the underlying infrastructure opportunities of the ecosystem, and how are we better outlining what are our business requirements and challenges so that we can better solution moving forward. It doesn't mean necessarily that we're just going to be reducing for the sake of reducing, but it's understanding how are these different solutions leaning into our need states such as relevancy. How are we driving more impactfulness for the consumer experience? How are we more effectively able to deliver that experience?
Do you think, or have you already seen that this actually results in a shift in media spend, where you're actually allocating dollars?
I would say it's less about where we've been allocating dollars and more about where is the future vision of where we need to go from an activation perspective of reaching the consumers where they want to be reached, and how are we able to better control for that, like audience management and experience.
Start thinking of questions, because I'm going to ask Evan to come back up and do a Q&A with everybody in a second. But I have one final question because I'm still trying to get my head around one of the core premises of Evan's model here, which is that this idea that like fraud, transparency, all the problems we've been talking about in events like these for the last 4 or 5 years, they're really a proxy for customer experience. I want to connect the dots a little bit more there. I'm not sure I see that. And I'd like to hear a little bit more about how does ad fraud impact consumer experience? Yeah, I mean, it's a waste for you, and obviously it's a scam in the system, but ultimately, how does all of this really add up to a better or worse customer experience?
Yeah, I mean, as I was mentioning, we are really focusing and addressing what are the underlying infrastructure opportunities that we have, and focusing on creating what is that better consumer experience. As we were mentioning, we really want to deepen those relationships with the supply side and leaning into our buying platforms to help facilitate those conversations in the hope that we can create that more transparent connection all the way down to the consumer. Fraud and viewability are still relevant to be verified, because we do need to understand what that is and how that's impacting our media performance and overall campaign health. However, the focus is that we're going to be building towards a more transparent supply and deepening those relationships, which our hope is that it will result in more quality impressions available to us with quality partnerships from quality publishers that is going to deliver that quality consumer experience.
But I think it's an interesting concept, and I'm very willing to play with this idea. One of the things that really intrigued me about this whole idea is that the junk in the infrastructure we've been talking about for the last 4 or 5 years is actually the real problem when it comes to why digital advertising is still so bad for a lot of consumers. I think it's an interesting concept. I'm really interested in seeing how this evolves. Evan, come on up, and let's take time for questions. Do you have any questions about how these guys are implementing this and what it really means for you? Nope. Right up here. And again, hang on, wait for the mic. And again, when you have a question over the next few days, let us know who you are and who you're with. Number 9?
I can just, oh, there we go.
Beatles fans.
Joe Lux from Beeswax. So you talked a lot about kind of the experience of consumers. I think a lot of that comes back to frequency, making sure you're not overloading them, not underloading them. Have you guys identified like the right cadence with which to address a consumer, and how did you figure out what the right cadence was?
That is a great question. It is something that I think is still an ongoing challenge because, again, data is incomplete in understanding that full view from offline to online. some of the steps that we have taken overall, and again, I'll give an example, is we have at least started to centralize a remarketing campaign into one evergreen holistic view. Whereas previously, what you can see in the marketplace is that every individual message or campaign is delivering a retargeted tactic within that particular campaign silo, even though you know that audiences and consumers may be across each of those different audience targets within those different messaging buckets. So what we wanted to do as a first step is to remove that siloed retargeting experience where truthfully we were probably over-frequencing and cookie bombing our consumers, and create at least a more controlled environment where we have that centralized in one campaign so that, again, we can at least correct for what we saw as a poor experience.
Evan, to draft off of that, Evan, you mentioned the stalking problem. How do you solve for that? That's not just a frequency issue. That's also a creative issue, and a retargeting and a general retargeting policy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's the challenge is that those, as we're going to call them, stalking tactics, are one of those things that performs theoretically very well, right? Because you have the most recent data. It's the most click-driven tactic that we probably run within our media programs. And it's the most measurable, but that then leads to it being high-performing, though probably low incremental value to the actual business. So something that we've done is really put a focus on incrementality, right? Like we want to be not only looking at what are diagnostic metrics really in terms of click-through rate or actual even site engagement rates. We really want to be understanding what is the incremental value that any of these activities are driving to our business. Because if we're sending somebody, 200 impressions over a 3-day period, that probably has a low incremental value to us as a brand. So I think that taking the lens of what is the incrementality of these activities, how do we understand their efficacy to the business, and asking harder questions of our partners in terms of proving value, I think it's been a huge step forward in our ability to do
What are
that.
some of the other metrics that you're going to be using? Because ultimately, how are you going to be measuring improvement in customer experience?
We're looking at the increase of shopping visits on our site, so the deeper engagements on our site. So if we're driving people to our site that don't really want to engage with us, or we're serving them ads that they don't really want to engage with, then we could probably extrapolate that the amount of engaged traffic on our site is going to drop. So we've been using that as a proxy. But ultimately, it's been about incrementality towards business objectives. And refocusing on incrementality is a primary way of us assessing efficacy of that experience. And to address your first question of, is fraud really not a problem, but it's a proxy of the consumer experience? What I mean by that, and to give more clarity on that, is if we are buying just persistent fraud within our program, what that tells us is not necessarily that fraud is not a problem. We don't need to worry about fraud. If we focus on the experience, fraud goes away. We don't need measurement and verification platforms anymore. What it tells us, though, is that we don't have the cleanest supply chain that we need, that we actually need. We don't have the right publisher relationships in place. And are there other problems within our underlying advertising technology ecosystem that are enabling that fraud, or you know what I mean, that are problematic within that fraud? If that's happening, we can also probably guarantee that we're not delivering well-timed or well-managed frequency as well. We're probably not delivering great placements either, right? Like the placements and the quality of the impressions that we're delivering are probably suspect. So we're using these things as indicators, not saying that they're not problems for us to address and deal with and have solutions for, but we're using them as indicators of the quality of the rest of our technology stack to deal with, to deliver an experience.
Over here.
Hi, Saki Pasha, LifeLock Norton. So assuming that an ad is not fraudulent, but like you were saying, it's like a crappy customer experience, it looks crappy, but it's performing. How do you balance that against, okay, so this ad is working, we don't want to run it. However, as a media owner with revenue numbers to hit, like I'm sure there's disagreements internally as well, so I'm wondering how you guys kind of deal with that struggle.
I would challenge what the word working means, right? Like part of this is that, a lot of us feel beholden to the performance, right? And then our procurement teams, our finance teams they start benchmarking and forecasting our budgets based off of performance, and then we have to explain quarter over quarter, year over year variations against that performance, and then we become locked into things that we know are not optimal experiences because like the rest of our organization is based around that. I think that it requires an enormous amount of education to those cross-functional partners, to those procurement teams, those finance teams that are helping set up your budgets, that are helping understand and value the efficacy of advertising for the business, that's justifying the expenditure of it, telling them that, like, listen, this performance that we're seeing right now isn't really the most important thing for us as a brand, or it's not the most important thing for us to be looking at. And that requires a lot of work. It requires a lot of meetings, a lot of education. It requires a lot of time to get them on board with that. But it's something that I think is super important.
I think this is going to make. Oh, we have another one. Go ahead.
Andrew Eklund from Cicerone. Great to see you again, Evan. Welcome, Kelly. Is there a dotted line? Is there a direct line to your creative team? Because as we know, great creative sometimes can, in some cases, break the problems that are happening downstream, can make bad technology work. How are you interacting with your creative team, whether it's your agency or internal team, to inform creative? Because sometimes taking a really crappy creative and trying to make magic out of it's not going to happen no matter what.
That's a great question, and I'll just say a top line, and then Kelly can address how we're actually operationalizing this. We just completed a DCO RFP, and the way in which we're going to operationalize this is not as a creative platform that then tags get sent to the media team, and then the media team tries to make magic out of it. It's one platform, and we're going to operationalize it cross-functionally. So instead of there being a creative team and a media team and a data team or a CRM team that sits within this in terms of how we're activating data within this platform, it's one virtual team that sits together, looks at a common data set, and actually collaborates together on what creative should look like.
Yeah, and just to build on what Evan was saying, truly what we have tried to do is partner with the creative leadership at a very early stage, understand what are their overall challenges, and build towards a process and ways of working within this new platform so that we are able to give data-informed decisions back to the creative team so that we understand what is working, what is not working. And again, creating that virtual space for the teams to collaborate in jointly so that we can, again, better be executing and letting the creative teams know that that we are supporting them and that we're going to be able to move this forward and solution for new executions moving forward.
Kelly and Evan, this is going to make a great conversation in the roundtable this morning. I wish you luck. I hope this is true. I hope this works because I think conceptually I'm with it. I want to see. Be really curious in a year for you to come back and show us how this actually played out in actual campaigns. Evan, Kelly, thank you so much.
Yeah. Just mention to these folks who are back here, there's seats. Oh,
Okay. Oh, you okay?
amazing.
We got it. Got it.
Just make sure they know there's seats available for these people.
Yeah, those of you who are sitting back here, we do still have seats up here at some of the front tables. Yeah, there's one here. I think there are a couple over there. So look, and you'll be able to find a seat. So a number of years ago, David Verklin, the legendary David Verklin, said data is the new media. And to some degree, history has proven him right. But if so, how do you actually plan for data? How do you start thinking about, especially the latest trend towards building good war chests of first-party data to help activate a lot of what we're going to be talking about over the next few days? So to take up this idea of how companies are harvesting and using their first-party data, we have our first panel led by Chris Morse, who's the VP of Growth Americas at M&C Saatchi Performance. He leads the growth effort there, and before that was at Merkle and Conversant. So please welcome Chris in our first panel.
Hey guys, how you doing? Good morning. All right, we're going to try to keep this as lively as possible. I know it's early and we're talking about data, but in that same respect, we're just going to have a nice conversation up here. We have 3 great panelists. I think each one of them is at a different stage with their use of not only first-party data, but with regard to their data strategy. And I think we'll get a nice cross-section of where everybody is within their journey, which can definitely, hopefully, help inform any one of you about what you're planning and how to move forward. So that being said, let's just go quick introduction so everybody can understand who's sitting up here. I already got introduced, so we'll start with Alberto here.
Alberto Aceves, Group Media Director of Programmatic Strategy at AKQA.
Yeah, I'm Luke Kintai. This is not on. There we go. Okay, Luke Kintai, Head of Content Distribution, Social Media, Autodesk, and I sit in our brand group at Autodesk.
Nick Martucci, Director of Marketing at Westgate Resorts, working in our rental division and focused on all marketing, both traditional and digital.
Cool. Excuse me. So we're going to get just right off the bat, let's get a baseline of where you guys are necessarily from a data strategy perspective and a data plan perspective. I know we're all at varying degrees of sophistication, but would love to sort of just set the record straight before we dive into some deeper questions on data. Sure. Nick, why don't you start with this one?
Yeah, I think from our side, we are in the planning phases, right? We have identified that so as an organization, we have 4 different divisions. Those divisions operate and are looking for very different audiences. However, there's overlap from one division to the next, where someone could, be a renter at one of our properties, but then eventually want to transition to more of a vacation ownership. And so we're in the process of kind of mapping out the different customer journeys based on those divisions, and working with partners like Salesforce and our agency to try to understand what technology we need to consider and evaluate as part of building our stack. So we're in, I would say, the early phases of planning.
Cool. Excellent. Luke?
Yeah, so I'm lucky to be in a group that has a really robust digital magazine called Redshift, which is kind of Autodesk's flagship media property, for lack of a better word. So the content's not a problem. We have an amazing content team that's producing, 3 to 4 pieces of long-form content every week. So from a distribution perspective, I love that because there's a lot of different ways we can slice and dice the creative. So really our strategy in a nutshell is kind of this push-pull model where we're pushing content to where audiences live, where it be, whether that be social, digital, email, and then getting them to take action on the content, right? So actually like visiting Redshift and coming to our site. So we're using social really as a place to harvest audiences, not build them, right? So we, we're well aware of, what happened over the last several years with, with Facebook and all these brands buying up, likes and building up their pages to be, millions of folks, all to be, then reminded, thanks to their landlord being Mark Zuckerberg, that their terms have changed, right? That actually you're gonna have to pay to reach all these people. So, yeah, we think we've learned our lesson there, and kind of gets to our mantra really as our group is that, we don't, the content is king adage gets thrown around a lot, which I think is kind of halfway there. I think it's short-sighted. I think our group is really all about thinking about content as a means to an end, and that end is, again, not, creative, that's awesome, or really good content, that's a start, but that end result is really an audience, and that's defined really by first-party data, right? So it could be variations of, how many cookies we have in our DMP, how many subscribers. So really, at the end of the day, those are the metrics we're really chasing after. It's not so much, the impressions and things like that. We want to build an audience and really play the long game there. So that's kind of our strategy in a nutshell.
Cool. And I think with Alberto, obviously a little bit of a different tact across your clients. What are you seeing from a data strategy or data plan perspective? Where are they in their spectrum? What are you seeing?
Yeah, first-party data is really, really important as it pertains to how we're planning and strategizing. We really try to get an audience-first approach as soon as the brief comes in. We don't want programmatic to be treated as a channel or just more of a method of buying. And using the first-party data to either target or suppress or to build the lookalikes It's really, really important for what we're doing there, because I think that's the seed from where everything else is going to grow.
Cool. Excellent. Thank you, guys. Just in terms of digging into, I'd say a little bit more with regard to first-party data, we know that that's potentially the best data that we can use, obviously, and the most precise, but it might not get you all the way to goal with regard to what your plans are, right? You know, I think people are still digesting first-party data. A lot of organizations are in different parts of their journey with regard to how to utilize that, whether it's on the acquisition or retention side. Necessarily. So what other data strategies are you guys using to sort of augment your first-party data to really get the reach that you need, or depending upon what your goals are, get to KPI? Because it can't all be done through first-party data.
Right.
Yeah, why don't we start with you, Luke?
Yeah, so we're doing, the things you can probably guess, right? We're building lookalikes, we're remarketing to our first-party data. One initiative that we're really trying to push in the second half is, again, I sit in brand. So historically, and I've always, and just a caveat, I've been at Autodesk 3 months, so I'm still relatively new. But historically, when brand has built first-party data audiences, they've pretty much lived and died there. So for whatever reason, I think the demand gen teams didn't necessarily want our data, or thought it was too broad, or wasn't segmented enough, or that it was a brand audience, whatever that means, right? So one thing that we're starting to do and seeing a lot of success is actually sharing our first-party data across the organization, and again, especially with our demand gen teams, and seeing a lot of success because we do have ways for attribution. So now, we can tell, hey, if you leveraged a first-party data segment from us, maybe it's a lookalike that you built off it, maybe it's the actual segment itself. It's resulted in a certain amount of subscription signups. So we're starting to see that, and again, we're comparing that against kind of the A/B test of targeting someone that's not part of a brand audience, and there's drastic results. So that's one thing we're really pushing, and it's more of an internal metric, but outside again of like how successful are we at retargeting, the lookalikes, we're starting to kind of use an internal metric of like an adoption rate of our first-party data, and this is probably more applicable, right, to large organizations, but it's surprising how siloed most big companies are. I came from Intel, which is like a whole other ball of wax, but yeah, it's surprising that they're, different groups have their own initiatives and campaigns, and there's really no kind of crossover. They don't really think about, I guess it's because they're so focused, or they think it's not applicable, but yeah, in my point of view, it's kind of crazy to think that you're not leveraging your data across the company, because that's so much of the battle, right, is actually getting someone to engage. And so if you can, keep that going, albeit outside of your group, and it takes a mentality of, it may not translate to a win for you, but kind of one team, one success kind of mindset. So that's kind of one thing that we're really focused on in the second half.
What do you think, Nick?
Yeah, I think we're kind of going through the basics, really, and just to kind of take a step back, I mentioned, there's different divisions within the organization. So one division acts as almost like a travel agency. You can book vacations, cruises, whatever you're in the mood to book. That has not, you won't be staying at a Westgate resort, right? The other division, I mentioned vacation packages. So someone kind of coming in, they're getting a really great rate, but there is the expectation that they're going to go on a tour and, perhaps become a vacation owner. Then we have the owners group, right? So I don't necessarily target owners as an acquisition. It's more about getting them to come back, right? So you may have only purchased a week or a half a week, but maybe you take more vacation time than that a year, and if you are loyal enough to purchase a vacation ownership through us, then you must enjoy the brand and have great experiences, so why not take a weekend in New York when you own in Orlando, right? On my side, the rentals is just treating the properties as if they're hotels, right? Where we look at it from a data perspective is just, in my specific division, is going back to the basics of, getting retargeting in place where it's ongoing, right? I would say we're a bit reactionary, where, if numbers are down for a specific property, or we're, forecasting occupancy to be down in a specific market, what are we going to do to get revenue up there, right? And it's not necessarily the right way to go about it. And we're trying to shift that way of thinking with our executive team, but, you know, it takes time. And I think Evan was kind of alluding to that a bit with, you know, we can get stuck kind of having to prove ourselves and, well, last year this was a bit different and whatnot. So I think from the data side, it's just understanding the right way to reach someone. And, you know, if you came for a vacation package, let's say, and you didn't have a great experience, I don't want to spend dollars on trying to attract you to come back, right? So we're trying to take into account not only how the media is performing, but also what is the experience like on property. So I'd rather be retargeting people that are leaving 4- and 5-star reviews, talking about how great of an experience it was. They stayed at the water park, they had a great time in Vegas, whatever it may be, as opposed to someone that was like, well, the rooms in New York were a little small. Well, sorry, I guess you've never stayed at a New York hotel before, because none of them are really that big.
Good point. Good point. What are you seeing across your clients over at Hotel?
Yeah, so not only just for the targeting itself, but I remember working with a finance banking client that was using it for suppression in order to reach prospects. And that's, you know, it's a great tool in order to do that, because you know that these folks are definitely not part of your customer base yet. Even, I think Luke mentioned building lookalikes. That can be great, but there's going to be instances where you may be building a lookalike off your customer, but not who they were before they were your customer. And that is the person you actually want to look for, because their behaviors may change after they're a customer. And by building that lookalike off that existing customer base, you might end up, you know, kind of preaching to the choir. Yeah, and just augmenting it with different third-party sets that you think could complement it has been one of the strategies that we've employed.
Cool. Excellent. Well, moving along, we all know it's great to have the data, but can we truly action off of it? You know, I think we're at a place where I think you've heard from everybody, especially T-Mobile, the ad tech, MarTech landscape's incredibly complex. So, you know, how are you guys navigating that? And what I specifically mean is around first-party data, there's a lot of tech that you can use to either help you out, augment, whatever it may be. Do you guys actually have the right technology in place to be able to not only access the data, but be able to use it in the right way from a campaign perspective? Is the data at your fingertips? Or do you not have the right technology in place and you're working towards that to figure out what your stack should look like? So tell me a little bit about the technology side in terms of what you're seeing on your side of the fence, what you're using, and how that applies to sort of using the first-party data to action. Why don't we start? Yeah, Nick.
Sure. So I think on our side, we're starting from a technology standpoint with Salesforce. There was, you know, decision made prior to my joining where we were going to onboard the Sales Cloud. We have a big call center. A lot of our business is generated through the call center. Part of my job is to try to shift that to more digital. But at the same time, if we're growing revenue for the company overall, everyone's happy. So if people want to keep calling in, booking reservations, that's fine. With Sales Cloud, we've also made the decision to onboard Marketing Cloud, and we've chosen the email first-party data through our CRM. Leveraging that data is the most important, because that is what we feel like. We're a very email-heavy company, and we want to get to a place where we're leveraging that database of people that have come and stayed with us, had these experiences. We want to be able to leverage that in a more efficient way. I think, you know, as we look at, you know, from a data management standpoint, we don't have a DMP in place. We don't have an ad server in place. We rely on our agency for that. We don't have a DSP yet. So I think the checklist is there, and we're working on prioritizing how we go about tackling each of those. What are more short-term versus long-term commitments and whatnot, and really what's the priority from a marketing standpoint, connecting all the channels. But with respect to, you know, going back to Salesforce, we've really built out like the audience journeys. You know, Alberto says if you come to, if you come to AKQA, you need to have like an audience first approach, and that's what they're going to ask you about. I said, if we were to sit down, I would tell you we don't have one just yet. We're more of a revenue first approach. This market's doing great, let's focus somewhere else. So, we're hoping that building out the journeys, and we're starting with the more complex ones, someone becoming an owner versus someone just coming to rent for the weekend. We started with the more complicated journeys first, and then we're going to slowly build those out.
Cool, excellent.
Yeah, and to clarify, when the client comes to us with their brief, as it pertains to programmatic, I really want to make sure that we're using an audience-first approach, just because that is the power of programmatic. And if you don't have your first-party data strategy already worked out, it makes my job a lot more difficult. The CPG clients that we work with, they don't have such an easy path to get that first-party data as, say, a client whose business is based like an app-based business where all your interactions with that company are through an app. That data that they're getting from the app and the device itself is so rich that they can really target the strategy in such ways that includes location and just all of these different data points that you would get from the device itself. It really allows you to create tiers of your first-party data based on just the usage of the app and things like that. So,
Yeah, just one thing I would add more on the kind of human resource side of the stack is we're finding that we have really talented analysts, right? That are totally, they're data geeks, right? They can figure out how to ingest data, segment it, convert it into any crazy pie chart you can think of in Tableau, right? So they're really good at like harvesting the data, and then we have the creatives, right? They're trying to act on that. So like some of our editorial team, and there's just a huge gap because they're not really sure like what does that mean, and kind of we're taking the historically the approach has been just fill up your 40-page PowerPoint with as much data as you can. So trying to make that a little bit more succinct and actionable. So to solve for that, we've hired a couple folks that are kind of what we call audience development strategists, and their job really is to straddle between the data analysts and then the creatives. And it's a hard, I'm not gonna lie, it's a hard skill set and some experience to find, because again, they're kind of someone that's like played a little bit in the creative space, but also understands the data. So their job is really to kind of translate that that data. So they're able to take a pretty complex set of data and say, actually, yeah, let's start to segment that by audience, also by behavior, and then start to even get down into like recommendations of what if we were to create a serialized content experience, or if we were to create a pillar asset that we could break up in these different segments. So yeah, and I think it's also like not really fair for you to ask your editors or your creatives to kind of like, hey, like here's the report, like make sure you're gleaning the insights correctly, and they're like, well, I'm not like I'm right brain, man, I don't understand that. So yeah, I think that's just something that's helpful to think about too, is that you probably in your organizations probably have kind of those two extremes, but if there's some way to kind of connect the dots, and again, there's not a lot of those people around, so it's those kind of hybrid marketers are really valuable, but hard to find in a uber specialized world that we live in. So.
Cool. Did you want to add anything else, or
No,
you good?
that's
Cool. Okay, so we have the data. You guys are figuring out the stack behind it, and now the obvious question is, let's talk about privacy and everything that is surrounding that, because that is going to play a role as we move forward. It already is playing a role from a GDPR perspective, and we have CCPA coming up in January, supposedly. So what I think would be interesting for the audience is, how are you guys handling that just from a compliance perspective, and what resources are you putting against it, excuse me, and how does that really affect how you're gonna change your marketing plans and use the data to make successful plans if we're gonna have a lot of restrictions with GDPR and CCPA? So
Yeah,
you want to start on this one?
I will. It's not an easy answer right now at this moment, simply because the legislators have not come to an agreement on what exactly this is going to look like starting January 1st, 2020. Thank God, enforcement of it won't start until June the 1st, but Our clients are looking to us to be thought leaders on this, and we're planning for 2020 starting in October, November. So without knowing what those laws are actually going to look like, it's a bit scary. It definitely is. There's a lot of companies that we have to wonder, are you going to be around? Simply because we don't know if they're going to be able to afford to actually be compliant. And what I mean by that is it kind of forces the company to have full-time legal staff that's focused on this, their data warehousing and how they're changing their business model to accommodate these new laws. That can be really, really expensive. I've known a lot of companies when GDPR took place, they closed their European business. So it's definitely a game changer, and we're kind of having these conversations with the data providers to find out, how are you guys preparing for this? Because winter's coming, and we want to be able to see like what are you doing to prepare? And to be honest, I have not got a lot of good answers. It's a little scary.
Yeah. I want to continue on.
Yeah, so I, being in Autodesk 3 months, I wasn't part of the, kind of adoption of GDPR, so can't necessarily speak to that experience. But what I can tell you moving forward is we do have somebody that sits on our marketing technology team that is, a privacy, basically lead and analyst. So they work with legal to translate kind of the implications of some of these changes to our strategy and performance. So that's helpful, and it's also, it's good to actually articulate that to, the way it can translate for us is like if I'm trying to pitch or go through a report with one of my VPs or upper management, and a lot of times it's like, well, wait, what happened here? And it's like, well, actually, this like GDPR kind of thing came through and it kind of affected our whatever it may be, like our search volume or, so it does help kind of explain that, the data, because there is real implications on like dips and performance, so that's helpful. But yeah, I mean, Autodesk is a global company, right? So it's in pretty much all the major markets, so we have to be really, deliberate and very comprehensive in terms of how we approach GDPR. So it's a real thing. And also to add, like our CEO is a big believer that that trust is not something that we have to do, is that we get to do. In terms of actually using trust as a differentiator, especially in our space, because we're dealing with a ton of different customers in different markets. We're a cloud-based company, subscription-based company, so we kind of see trust as something that we can actually use to our advantage, especially in the light of whether it be Cambridge Analytica, Facebook, Google, right? There's all these kind of issues out there. So if we can really be buttoned up and have the confidence in our customers that trust is really important to us and something that we want to use really in the way we market our company as a whole.
Yeah, and once you break it, obviously, it's really hard to get back. So rather not go down that path. And just, Nick, any final thoughts on the
I think,
compliance?
just thinking at it from a legal standpoint, our chief business officer has a legal background. So he's, and we don't have a team built out internally for it, so we're relying heavily on our agency relationship and the relationship with Salesforce. Fortunately, we don't, I guess it's a blessing and a curse, we don't have any international properties, so GDPR is not like a major issue right now. However, we were just speaking about this before, 60% of our properties are in Florida. We have another property in New York. Those international, especially over on that side of the pond, that's a big feeder market for both those destinations. So the opportunity to activate campaigns out there becomes challenging because now we have to have a different strategy, a different approach for that. With California, it's a little bit different, and I was asking Alberto about this before. I was like, are your clients going to have California-specific campaigns, or are they looking to kind of adopt that to more of a, no, we're going to treat all of the U.S. As we do California, but what does that do to the numbers? What does that do to the reach? How's that going to affect things? And you're going back into meetings talking about year over year, and you're like, well, we had to tighten targeting and things like that. So it's definitely a challenge, but right now internally we're relying on our external partners to kind of help provide that thought leadership.
Yeah. I just think it would behoove the clients to treat the way that they're approaching California to just approach the entire nation that way, because we're heading in a direction where the legislation is gonna happen beyond California, and the sooner they can get prepared to play in that environment, the easier it's going to be for them to kind of be nimble and adjust when those laws finally do come out.
Excellent. Well, I think at this time, just in terms of wrapping up, let's get to any questions that the audience might have, or feel free to pull one of these guys aside and further discuss if you have any questions or any specific questions pointed towards any of them after the panel.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think, Alberto, do you know this? I think that 22 other states have already said that they plan to follow CCPA. So it's essentially it's essentially going to be a national
Right,
policy.
and I think it just doesn't make sense to have 22 different approaches.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's going to kill us all. So you have to find a way to just take whichever state's going to have the most strictest approach, go with that one, because that's really going to be the framework for your safety.
And I think just to that point, just adding along to that, there are different ways that we're starting to see data come forward, right? Forrester coined, as we talked about, we didn't get to it from a last question perspective, but zero-party data. What is that? You know, it's splitting hairs at this point. It's sort of like, really? But in that respect, you know, do we need consumers coming forward being able to give their data to be able to overcome the CCPAs of the world and the GDPRs, you know what I mean, in terms of privacy? So the landscape's only getting more complex and interesting.
Yeah, absolutely, because zero-party data, from my understanding, it's opt-in and there is a value exchange that's happening. So the customer is fully aware that they are
Somebody want to
trading.
define that for us, for those who didn't read the Forrester report, zero-party?
Yeah. Zero-party data, again, as I understand it, is submitting your data, whether it's your name, your email, whatever it might be, but there is a value exchange. I'm not sure if the grocery store reward card would be a good example of that, but you are definitely getting lower prices at checkout because of the information that you're willingly giving them. This isn't information that's collected through cookies and browsing, you know, without your knowledge. You are definitely making a conscious effort to sign up and giving them specific information.
Yeah.
So that's the way I understand it.
Yeah, another way to potentially look at it is, you know, given the fact that companies are able to monetize your data, it would just be a matter of, you know, giving you basically a cut of that monetization. So yeah, there's like platforms, you're more familiar with some of them, right, that are like literally you do get, whether it's a dollar amount or a credit, you know, for the more surveys you fill out, stuff like that. So yeah, but I think that's essentially kind of what they're getting at. In terms of if it is the differentiation to actual monetary value, I think that's a little bit up for debate, but.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's going to be a consumer preference, right? Like, you know, I might play a little loose with my data. Like, I've opted into Keely and Big Token. I'm like, yeah, sure, if you want to, you know, I'll take some surveys and get a couple bucks. Like, I'd rather advertising be more tailored to me. But I think there's some other folks that are not there yet, and they're on the complete other side of that spectrum. But yeah, it's more like survey-based and whatnot. We have a few articles on it if anyone wants to read up on it.
Absolutely. I think that's sort of it from the panel perspective.
Well, actually, I wanted to follow up with Alberto on sure. I thought it was a really good point about the problem of lookalike modeling off of first-party data, that in certain categories you really want to be careful not to be looking too carefully at who your customer is now as opposed to who they were when you first got them if you're using it for prospecting. Could you give us maybe an example of where that goes wrong? I think that's a really an interesting concept, and I'm sure it applies to some categories more than others.
Yeah, I'll try to do this without revealing too much about my clients, but I do have a client that is definitely looking to acquire a lot more other customers, but who their customers are not necessarily reflective of who they were before they became a customer. And we noticed this because we started building this lookalike model off of that seed. And when I was looking at, you know, some of the traits and behaviors, I said, this doesn't look right to me. This looks like we're definitely preaching to the choir. Yeah, you might be, I guess, effectively reaching your competition, but is that necessarily what you want to do? Because my thought is you not only want to reach your competition, but beyond that, and prospects, people who never thought of joining your company as a customer. And I think that right there, to be able to discern what their behavior was before they joined, it's critical because we want to figure out who they were. So we looked more into kind of the demographic makeup of who that customer was. We found that they're males, like 85% male, ages 45 to 65. In the Midwest, they were predominantly Caucasian. On the coastal cities, they were more Hispanic, African American, Asian. So just knowing those factors right there helped us build a much better look-alike and to target that as opposed to just relying on that seed data. So I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting concept, I think. Listen, guys, thank you so much. We're going to take this up in our roundtable at the end of the morning.
Cool. Thank you, guys.
So following right off of this and talking about first-party data is data cleanliness, and it just so happens that one of our returning members of the summit has a passion for clean data. In fact, he is the Mr. Clean of data. Got him on the phone recently, and he had loads to say about the ways in which he not only at 3 Day Blinds, where he is currently the CRO, has gone through and cleaned and created new principles of data hygiene for the company, but the way he's done it at several companies and sees it as an industry-wide problem. So to talk about the ways in which he's gone about cleaning data, identifying what data dirt actually looks like, is returning champion Dan Williams. He's the CRO of 3 Day Blinds. He oversees most of the revenue and marketing operations there. Before that, at the Dumont Project. Please welcome back Dan Williams.
Thank you. So this was the easiest presentation that I've ever put together, and it's probably going to be the least complete because I can talk for 8 hours on this stuff. I love it. I study it. It's fascinating. I wanted to put 2.0 up here, but I didn't have time. But scrubbing the data 2.0. So the topic is very deep and wide, so I'm going to touch on a lot of different stuff. Feel free to come up to me later, and I can give you very specific examples. I've consulted a lot for huge companies. Everyone gets it wrong, and wrong is a relative term, depending on what you think wrong is. But let me talk about 3 Day Blinds real quickly. We're a 40-year-old company, so we have 40-year-old data, which is really fascinating. Does anyone know what to do with a 25-year-old email address? Nothing. Don't do anything with it. Throw it away. But we do. We have 25-year-old email addresses. So we manufacture window treatments. We sell direct to consumer. So we have a lot of data. We don't. A lot of companies that sell window treatments are distributors. So we actually do the marketing. Our salespeople are employees. They're not franchise or contractors. So in terms of data, we have a lot of data from beginning to end. We know which customers prefer the cord on the right, for example. So it's very fun. Define the thing. Well, what does it mean clean data? It's really interesting because, we look at year-over-year data. Raise your hand if you're always looking at year-over-year data. Anyone? Sales, how are we doing this week compared to same week last year, this month compared to same month last year? Are we looking at the right data? Is it really informing us of what we want to know? I got to throw in some Dilbert. Think about this. The data's wrong. Well, that's, the other data's wrong. Well, can you average them? He's like, yeah, I can multiply them too. But that happens all the time in companies, right? And I think that it's important to understand that data has a personality. There is bias. There's style also. And there is no uniform rule on what to do with data or what to call stuff. And I'm going to talk about some things in terms of naming conventions and things that everyone in this room is going to call something by a different name. It's going to be categorized differently. And it may change over time, which may be the worst thing. Is Facebook advertising social advertising, or is it display? Raise your hand if you think it's display. Raise your hand if you think it's social advertising. So fine, you're both right, but don't change it every 6 months because it's hard to look at your year-over-year numbers. All right, so important. 64% of all statistics are wrong 32% of the time. I just made that up. I don't actually know if there is a real number. So I consulted for a company and talked to the data scientist. And I said, how do you know your data is accurate? And he's like, it's not. And this is a multinational, multi-billion-dollar company. And because I just was in a meeting with their executives, and we were looking at sales data, and they were freaking out because the day before, sales didn't make sense. And he said there were 17 ways that transaction ID were spelled differently in their database. And he's like, that's 17 that he's discovered, right? So trans ID, TX ID, trans ID without the space, there's case sensitivity, just transaction, and there were a bunch more, but they had to map all of these different ways people were spelling things, and they had different transactions, different types of products were being sold. You know, that there were hard products, there were soft products, there were different things, there were memberships and things. So how are our sales yesterday? You have no idea what your sales were yesterday. You have an idea of what some of your sales were doing, but not all of them. So the number one thing that in my consulting life I did was look at the data. And the first thing I did when I arrived at 3-Day Blinds was look at the data. And the report that they really loved looking at 3-Day Blinds was digital versus non-digital marketing spend. And the private equity firm in the board meetings really loved looking at that slide. You know, and I'm like, well, what's non-digital? They're like, well, you know, like newspapers and TV and stuff. I'm like, all right, well, TV, there's a lot of digital aspects to TV. They're like, well, whatever. I'm like, well, what about postcards? And they're like, well, that's definitely non-digital. I'm like, what if someone comes to our website and we cookie them, and then we match that cookie with an address, and then we send them a postcard? Is that digital or non-digital, right? So the thing is, even how we name things and how we categorize things and we make decisions, right, based on personality, style, whim, and just bad data, or old data. So this is some data I found. So I don't know, $3.1 trillion, the cost of bad data to U.S. businesses each year. I don't know where I found this. It doesn't really matter what the numbers are, but think about it. Think about how much media is spent and decisions are made with bad data, right? Like transaction ID, like radio's working great. Well, is it? Like, you know, did you spell transaction ID right? Like, consumer data decay, 25%. So that's interesting. And talking about custom audiences and lookalikes, one of the things that we have found is freshness of data. I know companies that are like, yes, we use custom audiences in Facebook. 2 years ago, we did that, and it's been great. And it's like, wait a second. 2 years ago, those people are different. So we update our custom audiences on a frequency that will make your head spin. But that type of stuff is happening all the time. 40% of leads contain bad data. We know this, right? People that are giving us their information. You know, I fill out forms all the time. My name is Mickey Mouse often on things I fill out because, you know, I don't want to give them my real name. Or my phone number, I type in 1 digit off. The poor person that has my phone number with 1 digit off gets called all the time. KPIs, right? KPIs are the thing that, this is how companies are run. Are you looking at the right numbers? Are you, here's an example, product returns, right? So you could say, hey, in March, returns went up. Great. So what does that mean? Well, last year in March, returns were 2%, and this year they were 4%. They doubled. Holy cow, we need to figure out what's going on. So, not 3-Day Blinds, but a company that I was consulting for had a product, it was a skincare product, returns went up. The thing is, products don't get returned immediately, right? And it depends on the product. So it wasn't what happened to that product that month, or did we market, the first fingers get pointed to marketing. What did you guys do that we got product returns? It's like, wait a second, what do you mean? Marketing didn't do anything. And then it goes to supply chain and manufacturing and that sort of thing. Well, someone changed the caps on the product, right? But that was months ago, months and months ago. And then they started getting into people's hands and they didn't like the caps, or the caps broke or whatever. Interesting thing, the SKU on the cap, the part number didn't change. They changed the caps but not the part number, because that's a pain in the ass. I don't want to change the part number. Then we have to change the thing in the software, and it's not an easy thing to change. And so when we're building this, we got a better deal on these new caps. They're cheap, so we bought 4 million of them, and then they replace it now the data is terrible, right? Now the data is just completely, not only is it wrong, you don't even know when they changed the caps. You have to go back and look at emails and stuff, because the part number is the same. So, and this is happening all the time, and that's one very small example. And looking at things compared to what, especially time periods, right? There's a downturn in sales. You know, what happened? Everyone seems to look at the immediate thing. Like, what did we do yesterday that sales are down today? Well, I don't know. Is that how it really works? We looked at marketing, and we found that, shocker, spending money today doesn't necessarily increase business today. And we know exactly in different channels when the impact is going to happen, and it's very different by channel. So we don't get worried if we start a TV campaign and the next day business doesn't explode. And then time is a big factor. You know, if you look at things over periods of hours or minutes, you're probably missing the point. If you look at them over years, you're probably also missing the point, because things change so quickly. And if you are lucky enough to name something one thing and not change the name of that thing over many years, then you have a good amount of data. But be careful, because just because you have the data doesn't mean it's good to look at it. I mean, 40-year-old data, you can imagine. Mini blinds, you know, like the metal mini blinds. I think in the 80s, that was like 80% of our products. So if we made decisions based on that data, we would be in trouble. All right. I love to weld. Welding is super fun. I do it as a hobby. That's a welding machine. That's underwear. So those things are very different, and probably couldn't be more different. You should wear underwear when you weld. So there's something, you know, maybe in common with those two things. But a lot of people compare welding machines and underwear and look at it the same way when they look at their data, and they're very different. But I highly recommend welding as a hobby, and wearing underwear. All right, so here's a not made-up quote. This is from Experian. Data quality impacts the bottom line of 88% of businesses. Inaccurate data. I mean, where do they get that from? Is that like a survey they send executives, and executives like, yeah or no? Like, it must, I mean, I would imagine inaccurate data impacts 100% of companies. But, I mean, it's funny because it's a real quote from Experian, and it's probably inaccurate. I started thinking about things, so I started taking copious notes, and I can't read what I wrote because it's a mess. But there's interesting studies on data, and there's what I like to do is ask a lot of questions. One of our head of customer experience, he's Six Sigma black belt. Our head of manufacturing is also. I find it funny, and I make fun of them that they're black belts in something that's not actually like hand-to-hand combat. But there's 5 questions to ask, or ask 5 questions whenever you see data. And it's kind of interesting, and there's a Lincoln Memorial example. Lincoln Memorial was eroding faster than expected. So they studied it and they said, we know why it's eroding. We wash it too often. It's like, okay, great, well, don't wash it as often. They're like, great, problem solved. Well, they didn't wash it as often, and there was bird shit all over it all the time. And then they're like, oh, there's a lot of bird shit on it, so we got to wash it more often. And it's like, great. Well, someone was smart enough to say, why is there bird shit on the Lincoln Memorial? Well, there's a lot of birds. Okay, well, why are there a lot of birds? Well, they like insects, and there's a lot of insects around the Lincoln Memorial. Well, why are there a lot of insects? So they installed these new bright lights on the Lincoln Memorial, and it attracted a lot of insects, which attracted a lot of bugs, which attracted the birds, which shit on the statue, and then they washed it too much. So think about that when you're looking at your data, right? Who shit on the Lincoln Memorial? I question AI. Real quick, I am bombarded by agencies and vendors of various products and services that say, we have this amazing AI that's going to get you your best customer. And I'm like, great. Do you also have AI that's going to get me a pretty good customer? Because I want them too. I'll take a crappy customer. I'll take any customer. Just, do you have that? Because it sounds like just finding the best customer is stupid. And then AI, when they explain it, it just sounds like an algorithm, it's optimization. AI to me is, find me the customer that hasn't bought a house yet, but is going to, and then they're going to need window treatment 7 years from now after they realize doing stuff yourself sucks, and you should hire someone else to do it. Everyone who has a first home knows you do everything yourself. It's your first home. You're not going to pay someone to come and measure and do window treatments. That's ridiculous. You can do it. You know how to use a tape measure. You do it once, and you're like, fuck that. I'm never doing that again. Like, that's stupid. I want to get those people that tried it the first time. So I question AI. Like, just because it says AI doesn't mean it's smart or good or using data properly. And then the AI that we use, or the machine learning, like, what data is it pulling from? How is it learning? Like, what data does it see as valuable? Someone transacted? Well, great, but isn't it really valuable if someone doesn't transact also? The typical optimization is the blue ad gets more clicks, show the blue ad more often. Well, that's stupid, right? Like, do we all agree that like that type of thing needs to go away? Maybe the blue ad gets clicked on more because people like blue, right? But you're not getting more customers. And maybe the green ad gets clicked on by people that are thinking about buying a house and will be a customer 7 years from now. So here's some things that people may not think about in data cleanliness. And data cleanliness, runs the gamut from just inaccurate data to how you categorize things. Allocations, here's an example. Finance department looked at TV spend and wanted to allocate it regionally. So national cable TV spend, how do you allocate that regionally? Does anyone have an idea of how they would do it? The cost of a national campaign, how would you allocate it if you're not nationwide, but you're mostly nationwide? Anyone can think of an idea? So finance decided to do it by sales, right? Which is, I think, how a lot of people allocate spend, by sales. I changed it and I said, let's do it by population, because ultimately, those are the eyeballs, right? Like, if it's a national CPM, that CPM is the CPM in Wichita and Salt Lake City. It's a national CPM. So who's right? Neither one of us, really. But the thing is, do it the way you do it, understand why you do it that way, and how it may impact decisions. Media, TV in Wichita is expensive. Well, is it? Or is it how we allocate media to Wichita? So if you understand it, and then you understand your own biases, then you can make decisions that are informed, and that's what data is for, I think we discovered earlier today. Allocations are used all the time. Finance needs to fit things into nice little buckets, and they do it, and decisions are made, and sometimes those buckets aren't necessarily the ones that you would define them as. Media channels, social, digital, we discussed. Retargeting versus prospecting. I know companies that don't, they just look at display. They don't separate retargeting and prospecting. Obviously, very different channels. One's, lower funnel, one's higher funnel. There's another funnel categorization, right? Like, where is it in the funnel? Do people look at KPIs based on, well, we're spending this much on branding and this much on, lower funnel? Well, are you categorizing stuff properly in the funnels? And that's why we separate retargeting and prospecting, because it's different. Case sensitivity, did everyone understand that Google Analytics is case sensitive? Right? Google Analytics is a nice check. I don't recommend using it for, end-all, be-all analytics, but we look at it. It's amazing when I've looked at analytics accounts, how many ways you can spell paid search. One way is paid search. One's PPC, SEM. You can do it in lowercase, uppercase. You can have, all sorts of ways to spell it. Google. So those things matter. And if you're like, hey, I'm looking at Google Analytics and our SEM seems to be down, I don't know, maybe it's not. Maybe someone just spelled something differently. Culture, misspellings are pretty common in databases. I tried to find some funny examples, but when you're doing a database query, right, that your BI tool is pulling from a database to show you what sales were yesterday, and someone misspelled underwear, in the database, you're missing your underwear sales. It happens all the time. Lead qualifications, again, what's a lead? What's a customer? That's something that I think all companies struggle with. Are they a customer if they purchased once 5 years ago, or are they a prospect, or and if you look at those differently and categorize them differently, you'll make decisions differently and maybe make better decisions. And what is a customer? We use Newstar data. I love Newstar. They look at households. So the data is really accurate and it's very actionable on a household level. Well, what if that person moves? That changes the, in aggregate in all our decision making, it doesn't impact things that much or maybe at all, but it's an interesting thing to think about, and especially with CCPA and things like that. What if people move, And what if you're doing persona marketing and you're targeting people in a certain area with a certain income and well, let's just cut to the chase. We're targeting women 35 plus, right? Everyone? Who has a persona that's female, 35 plus, professional, shops at Nordstrom's, drives a BMW? Everyone? Same person? We're all marketing the same person? Good. Nestle called her Barb. We called her Kathy. The skincare company called her Deborah. Persona marketing is interesting. Also, I've ditched persona marketing for that particular reason, because I want the 27-year-old dude that just bought a condo also. Pay attention. So one of the words that I write down often and I talk about at my meetings is discipline. So the first thing I did was I hired a traffic coordinator. We have kind of an in-house agency at 3 Day Blinds. A traffic coordinator was my first hire, an out-of-college person with zero experience. And I wanted to make sure they didn't have a degree in advertising or marketing or have ever taken a class in advertising or marketing. I think they were a sociology major, which was perfect. I didn't want them to have any bias. I didn't want them to have any opinions on data. And the traffic coordinator was the person, and still is, the person that is the gatekeeper of all the data. No one can create a campaign. Only the coordinator can. Why is that? Because everyone will screw it up, right? Someone's going to spell it PPC. Someone else is going to spell it SEM. Someone's going to traffic the wrong stuff in the wrong way with the wrong phone number. It happens. Why did that radio campaign get no phone calls? Well, I was pissed off because we spent a bunch of money in Philadelphia on a radio campaign, and then I called the phone number that was on the ad, and it went to voicemail. So that was wrong, and apparently the traffic coordinator was on vacation, and someone else created the campaign. So the most important hire I made the first month on the job was someone that made, entry-level salary and just made sure the data was clean. And when I say clean, it's really that it was a disciplined, repeatable, way to define things and never change it. So when we look back and we do year-over-year KPIs, we know exactly what's happening. You can change the habits right away. You can start asking those questions. Is that data accurate? Where are we getting that data from? Why is it why are we comparing it that way? Shouldn't we be comparing it a different way? The discipline part is interesting because everyone thinks they're disciplined, right? Everyone says, yeah, we're a disciplined marketing team. We have clean data, and you have to test how disciplined you are. So there are ways to audit your data, to look for misspellings in your database, to look for things that don't, kind of match the methodology. If you have a naming convention, all the things in your database should be named those things, and nothing else. Invest in tools, and everyone has to get better always. So, are you guys ready for the sexy, taboo part of my presentation? All right. What is that? It's a squash. So I think this represents a lot of data. We think we have sexy data, but really we just have a squash with a bikini drawn on it. Yeah, our data's great. Yeah, no, we do all those things. All right, you sure it's not just a squash with a bikini drawn on it? And I think I may have one more boring slide, but for the nerds out there, the Harvard Business Review magazine for this coming month or 2 months, it's about metrics, and it's a very cool article about categorization and how our brains categorize things. And when you're walking through the forest, you can look down and say that's a stick or a snake, and it keeps us alive and stuff. Well, there's a lot of similarities with how we talk about data and biases and style and that kind of stuff too, as well as data integrity and bad data and everything of that nature. So I highly recommend reading it. It's very cool. And I think I've covered everything I might have gone over. Well, thank you very much.
We have time for questions for Dan. Could you tell us more about how you're implementing sort of protocols at 3-day blinds to prevent a lot of this stuff happening up front?
Oh, yeah.
You mentioned the one person that you'd hired.
Right.
What
so
else?
that person then gets promoted. And so I've had 5 of those people in our marketing team, and then we hire a new one. And the person that just got promoted trains that person. And so I have like a farm system of people that now are like, I don't want to say robots, but understand like the data integrity. A woman that worked for me went to work for an agency, and she was a traffic coordinator, and she had moved up to marketing manager over a few years and got a job at an agency in LA. And this agency got a big client, and they were doing their social media campaigns. And she called me, and she's like, they don't track anything. They used one social media like tracking link for Twitter and Facebook, all of them. And the agency's comment was, the client doesn't care about that granularity. Just doesn't really matter. Then she ended up quitting because the way it was run it was nuts for her, and she went to an organization that actually tracked things. But to answer your question a different way, I look at Google Analytics and I look for anomalies. I look at our data and I look for anomalies. There's really good tools now that kind of can do that. There's also, robot process automation, if anyone's into that stuff nowadays, that help data integrity, that can do these checks on a daily basis. If you usually sell 300 underwear in a day and you sell 1,000 or one, those types of things. Maybe there's something going on.
Over here.
Hey, Dan, Nick Martucci, Westgate Resorts, just following protocol, Steve. You mentioned not using Google Analytics as like the end-all, be-all. So what do you use, and how are you?
Our CRM database, really is the end-all, be-all. Primarily because we do a lot of non-digital advertising, so not everything is tracked in Google Analytics. We do track phone calls in Google Analytics and things like that, but everything feeds into our CRM database. So, if you're 100% e-commerce digital company, then it's probably a really good.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Hi, Jen Perry from Wonderman Thompson. Great presentation, by the way. Something that you touched on that I personally, so it's more of an observation, have found difficult is this contextual data, because it's not always black and white, right? So as we think about journey management and experience planning and starting to capture where people are in the journey so we can deliver the right experience, we're moving past just prospect identification, but are they in the awareness stage? Are they considering? So, and the ultimate goal is to push people down the funnel. I've just seen that with some clients, that classification of where people are is not always as accurate as it could be, and that causes an issue because we start circling people around. We're not pushing them down. So I don't know if you've come across that.
Well, that's a great question. What I have found is the marketing teams are dreaming up all this awesome stuff, right? Like should we email them first or show them a display ad? Or should we show them 2 display ads before we email them and then send them a postcard? Fucked up. Like, how are you even going to know that, that they even received an email, right? So what I would say is we can't even have those conversations until we really trust the data, that we know that customer's journey. Like, how do we know where they are in the stage of, and make decisions in your DMP or whatever, that this is how we are going to determine that a person is in this stage of the buying process, right? Like, these are the rules. And it may be different for different companies, but setting, being disciplined about setting the rules and naming conventions and everything like that, then I think that stuff starts to become easier. But I would, whenever I hear about, like, sophisticated marketing, it's like, oh, geez, well, let's just make sure that we know, have the foundation first before we start getting cute.
Okay, yeah, that's great. So it's like interaction mapping, make sure the foundation's in place, and then also like the Q&A over time, but okay.
Yeah, questioning your data all the time, and the recency and the freshness, I think we were talking about that also today. Yeah, even if people have really good data, it may be old or
Well,
accurate.
for you, in your context, how are you gauging recency within the context of 3-day blinds? What's the scale or the calendar for you?
So that's a great question. So because you don't buy window treatments every day, it's not a consumed product. We look at it differently, and we're starting to get better at looking at data, and we have a unique ability to know things about our customers that you can't buy because we have people in their homes, which sounds creepy, but we actually go to your home and measure your windows. So if someone spends, $10,000 on window treatments, you may say, like, well, that's a lot of money. We'll contact them in 3 or 4 years. But if they have, a 12,000 square foot house and that's just their dining room, they should go into a different campaign. So it kind of depends. It also depends on the channel. We found Facebook data, updating Facebook data, as frequently as possible, even daily or real time, can pay dividends. So, and those are 2 totally different examples, but I think you need to look at, recency and frequency that way.
So answer your own question. How are you going to find that that couple that bought a house 7 years ago has had the bad DIY experience and is now ready to actually buy blinds?
Still trying to do that. But what we have done is we've eliminated personas. The only target we do is homeowner, which makes sense.
Even though you are looking for a persona in the end.
Well,
isn't it?
It's a homeowner with windows. If you own a home
Okay.
and you don't have windows,
All right.
we're not interested.
Fair enough. Dan Williams, as always, thanks so much. And Dan's going to be is going to be talking more about this in the roundtable at the end of the morning. We want to have our first sponsor message of the morning session, and welcome our sponsor, Location Sciences. I do always want to say a word about our sponsors here at Media Post. Sponsors at Media Post know that we love to feature them and give them the opportunity to share with you their value proposition. But they also know that unlike a lot of other publishers and a lot of other events companies, we don't do pay-to-play here. So the editorial content that we put up on here for that 3 hours every morning is really all you talking to each other about your own stuff. Sponsors know when they buy into Media Post that they don't have an influence on the editorial piece, and they're supporting that editorial integrity. And we, as editors ourselves, we appreciate that and are especially thankful that they buy into the way we've been doing things here for the last 15, 20 years. For today's sponsor of today's coffee break is Location Sciences. Jason Smith, who's the Chief Business Officer of U.S. Location Sciences, is going to talk today about how transparency will shape location marketing for the future. So please welcome Jason.
Okay. Hello. How are you guys today? First, thanks for spending time with me today. You've been here early and often, so I thank you for spending time and listening to a conversation that we'll have this afternoon. And thanks to Media Post for having us. We're a small startup company, but we think we're making some big impact in the industry. Okay. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about some summary findings of a report that we released today. If you visit Wall Street Journal after our conversation now and our website, as well as Business Wire, we'll have a full comprehensive report. But my goal is to give you some good data and maybe less of a sales pitch, and hopefully you walk away smarter. So you may have a big stat on me, but I'm Jason Smith. I've got 17 years of agency experience, so it's very interesting to get the warm seller introduction to talk to you guys, but I'm now Chief Business Officer of Location Sciences. And what we do is we have one core mantra. We don't sell media. We don't sell data. We don't sell attribution. We're essentially an independent, agnostic company that focuses on improving performance and transparency of location-based marketing. We do that through a proprietary technology. It's called Verify, where we examine all of the global signals of advertisers that focus on location marketing, and we provide you with depth of performance insight. We give you transparency of the data that informs what you've been doing, and we compose that type of research and insight across the global set of location marketing. So a lot of what we're going to talk today about is data that's maybe underneath what you've seen from your location-based marketing today, and how we've unearthed some new truths. But before we do that, I pardon any redundancy for folks that are very familiar, but there are two core components of what we look at. So when we talk about location data, we're typically referencing two core components. One is a core IP data set, which is born at the sort of entry point of a device or an internet-enabled device. So it's a static component, typically considered less accurate. That's per the MRC guidelines. And then your second element is GPS signals, born at the heart of an operating system on a phone, also typically capture within the device that you use. And all that means is it's capturing data quite often. And so if you have a specific proximity effort, a GPS signal is typically what you would want to rely on for accuracy. And so what we set out to achieve in our understanding was, does fraud or inaccuracy exist in the combination of these two data sets? And what we started to discover was that there were some noticeable occurrences that have been happening in our industry that some of you may know and others don't. and that is around the fraudulent component of high-quality GPS signals. They typically occur in one of three ways. One is the apps that you use. They may not be qualified to collect GPS-level signals. It's not providing you value and you're near a location, so there's not a need for that app to collect that data. We've also seen, because we spend money on location marketing, there's incentives for various application developers to fake GPS signals. And I'd say the last is maybe less negligent. It's actually just a failure to actually recognize on the supplier side the difference between IP and GPS. And so for many folks that do buy location marketing, and don't ask these questions, I forget the gentleman's name earlier, but he talked about his agency, someone that left for an agency and criticized the lack of inquiry. Sometimes these questions just aren't asked. So we help marketers ask the right questions and find truth in the source of what they do. So within our research, which is titled the 2019 State of Location Advertising Report, I'm going to show you some summary findings. There are several more pages, and I encourage you guys all to take a good look at it. And I'll be around. You can ask me questions as well. But what we sought out to understand were three core questions that we thought would be valuable to marketers. I've been a marketer for a very long time, and I wanted to focus on answering questions as opposed to scaring the shit out of you with just like fraud is everywhere. I don't know if that's very helpful. So we looked for three questions. One was, are our ads really deployed near the desired locations of your marketing campaigns? We define locations as a venue or a store where transactions take place. And our second question was, can we be sure that the quality of the quality of the location data that's being used? Quality being defined of the makeup of GPS versus less accurate and reliable data, IP. And our last question, which is the most important part, our product is focused on unraveling transparency in data, but as a marketer, I don't care about data. I care about how data improves performance, outcomes. And so if we're not working towards that end, we're not sure we're a very valuable partner. And so I'll talk to you about some of the performance insights that we gathered as a result of what we provide in the marketplace. Okay? So these are some of our key findings, and I'll talk to you about how we got there. But some of them are a bit startling. Some are maybe things that you may have known. We'll start with we audited 500 million impressions globally. We audited a swath of retail, QSR, telecom, and auto manufacturers, very focused on foot traffic, point of sale. And we looked across 25 plus suppliers globally in the marketplace. So in that examination, what we saw was 65% of a given campaign was delivering poor quality or mistargeted location data. So that is, by definition, that is waste that impacts financial decisions within your business. And we also discovered across the apps that have the permissions to use GPS-level signals, we discovered that 36% of those apps were actually conducting fraudulent behavior as it related to providing quality, accurate, authentic GPS signals for your marketing. And then the most startling point for us was, of all of the impressions that are being delivered across what we analyzed, only 14% of the impressions within those buys were using GPS signals. So what does this mean? Essentially means that there is waste, there is impact on performance, and certainly challenges to a number of proximity-based marketers. And so the news isn't all bad, though. So good news is we'll talk about a long tail of suppliers that contributed mostly to these results, but there are very good suppliers that have good quality data, good quality work for your business. And in working with those folks, we've actually seen a plus 40% inaccuracy of the impressions that are delivered across the brands, the publishers, and the campaigns that we audited within our report. So how do we get there? So we look at two core metrics. The first is what we call point of interest health, the desired location that you wanted to target as a marketer. And so when we looked at that, we walked away with the key finding that of 100% of impressions, 29% on a given campaign was missing the target. Various reasons for that, but in summary, some were soft as just negligence, essentially inattention to the program, or maybe there was incorrect campaign setups, but maybe the most startling piece was just turning off campaign targeting. And why would that happen? This happens because GPS signals are also finite. So for me, location marketers, and you would like to spend as much money as you can to get this stuff achieved. And we don't know many publishers that are going to say no to your money. And so in exchange for that, in the background, are sort of swaps of GPS and IP level signals that are very difficult for marketers to actually see without some type of third party to validate for you. So big number. And I mentioned that it's not all doom and gloom. There are some suppliers that do a very good job. And so across the 25 plus suppliers that we audited, what we came to conclude was that 60% of them were accurately delivering the media that you want. We have a threshold of about 80% plus. We firmly believe that if attention is paid, can easily achieve 100%. In fairness, when you see me, you can talk to me about why 80%. But above that 80% threshold, we saw that 60% of the suppliers that we audited actually fairly good. Okay. And so our second metric looks at location signal quality. So makeup, GPS, and IP, and what you deliver. And then the makeup of that quality of data that's being used for your location marketing, we saw that of the suppliers we audited, 36% of them were using poor quality, unbeknownst to many of your marketers. So in summary, you know, that kind of brings you to a space where you see maybe a less scary component for the supply side. 35% of the suppliers that were delivering good quality data were good, and the remainder were maybe less stellar. So what does that mean for you as a marketer? It actually is a good equation. It gives you a chance to consolidate your partner selection, right? I worked in this space for a very long time, and I remember having 10 different location partners on a plan, and it just makes you wonder, do you need that much? How can you consolidate, gain efficiencies, be smarter? So the key takeaway is, according to our research on a given day, with the diagnostic that we applied, up to 65% of money that's spent on location marketing today could effectively be deemed as waste, and likely unbeknownst to marketers because of the way our ecosystem works. If you are in this space, you will know this for sure. The great majority of our industry is composed of two pieces. One's coupled packages that sell you media, data, attribution together, and then others that likely buy media or conduct off of an exchange without real access to the data. So this gives you a sort of agnostic look at how that works. And I'll just close with, what does it mean in terms of performance? This was the most important thing to me to talk to such a smart room of marketers about, was what do you do with it and how do you get better? Doesn't help to just know that things aren't as great as we thought. What we did learn was we ran a pre and post. So this test was looking at marketers that essentially did not have our technology in play. And then we measured the results of their performance after implementing our tech and also adhering to the optimizations that we saw. So two key stats. We saw a 40% increase in the accuracy of the data or quality of the data that was being used, so more GPS was bought. And that's good because it didn't impact pricing, but you got higher quality signals. And then of the effectiveness of the accuracy of targeting impressions, we saw up to a 10% lift, which is a noticeable impact if you start to extrapolate out on millions of dollars. So nice savings to reinvest into your marketing. So four key takeaways. The first is, we're now aware that there is a representation of 65% of mistargeted spending, but the good news is much of it can be completely avoided just by having some type of additional insight on what you do. Independent transparency into GPS and IP level data can be a great contributor to improving that performance. Third point is, location marketing can actually be improved if you require technologies that give you this type of insight. Think about senior marketers in the room when we talked about viewability. what was it, 7, 10 years ago, there was a big fear about what that meant. And as that gets embraced, the industry improves. And I say the fourth is that don't be afraid. There are actually some very good suppliers in the marketplace. So our encouragement is to say, inquire, ask about that, understand which of these suppliers are actually meeting these types of standards, and then really focusing your energy on consolidating and finding the right spaces for your business. All right, so thanks for hanging out with me. And I'm at time, yeah? Just a little over. Okay, and I'll see you guys if you've got questions, but thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Great. Thank you, Jason. Great stuff there. We have actually a coffee and networking. Don't pay too much attention to